The year was 1861. A young child was born to Maharishi Debendranath and Sharada Devi on the 7th of May. A child who was to win the hearts of millions across the globe. A child who was to become a legend by becoming the first Indian, rather first Asian, to win the Nobel Prize for the first time. A child whose creation in one lifetime would become the source of studies and researches for innumerable professors and scholars across countries. A child who was to write the national anthem of two countries and deeply influence a third. A child who was to play a leading role in Indian cultural renaissance and become one of the major architects of modern India. He was none other than Rabindranath Tagore, whose poems, stories, novels, letters, essays, songs, dramas, paintings that have dominated Bengali and Indian literature and culture through the years. Let us take a short glimpse of his life for all of you who would want to know so. Tagore was born in a Calcutta that was totally different from the Calcutta, or for that matter, any other big city of India today. First of all, there was no electricity. Evening brought with it a darkness that was all-encompassing. There weren't even the bright gas lamps of later years. Young Tagore had to study under the mild shade of lamps, that too lit by rapeseed oil or something of its kind. There were no fast forms of transport. No buses, cars or trams. There were only the carriages for men drawn by horses and palkis or palanquins for the women if they had to visit any relatives or go to the temple, though that too was rare. And they were totally dark inside. In fact, I read somewhere that if the women had to take a dip in the holy Ganges, sometimes the bearers dipped the whole palki in the holy water, the women almost drowning inside. Basically, life was plain and simple, and it progressed at a much slower pace than today. Tagore wasn't allowed to go outside, far from it. But he wasn't unhappy. In fact, he learned and could be happy in the simple surroundings of his home. The many nooks and corners and balconies of the Jodashako house, the whole campus, the little pond inside, the huge banyan tree, everything providing so many instances of joyous wonder to the young dreaming child, like he would sit and think, what lay under the earth's crust? Could mysterious tunnels be dug to reach the patal of his dreams? Tagore was born to a huge affluent family. Huge because he was the 14th child of his parents. His father, Maharishi Debendranath Tagore, was respected by one and all. His sacrifices to repay his own father, Dwarkanath Tagore's debts, his saintly leanings, his search for the Almighty amidst the Himalayas and open barren spaces for months on end, not unknown to anyone. Tagore was born to an affluent family, but there was no trace of affluence in his childhood at all. He was constantly under the care of servants who told him what to do and what not to do, given plain wholesome food by them. Winter meant one white shirt over another white shirt. Socks were unheard of before the age of 10. He met his mother only late at night, and his father, as I said, was absent for long periods. In fact, Tagore writes of one particular sham who, in order to make his own work simple and in order to curb the lively nature of the young child, would often draw a Lakhun Rekha around him and say, beware, don't cross it. Danger lurks for those who do so. And the young child, having heard of Sita, dared not do so. So as Tagore said, we were not spoiled. We couldn't go out. But we had huge periods of me time, my own world of imagination where I could fly off to whenever I wanted to. Tagore didn't like school. The strictness, the four walls of the classroom, the strictness of his teachers, disillusioning the soft child again and again, be it at Oriental Seminary or normal school, though At first, he had really wanted to go to school when his elder brother, Shumendranath, and nephew, Shotter Prasad, were going to school for the first time. They were 2 years older to him, and they were going in a horse-drawn carriage. So he really wanted to go for the first time, but then slowly he was disillusioned. But that was not to say that he was not studying. The Tagore household was culturally so very, very progressive. So there were constant tutors to teach the young children everything that could be imagined. Right from learning wrestling early at dawn, then putting on a shirt to sit down to physics, to physical science, life science, history, geography, literature, maths, and then going to school, coming back, then drawing classes, gymnastics, and then English literature in the evening when he couldn't keep his drooping eyes open. At 9, he was let off. And constantly there were so many learned men, poets, philosophers, musicians coming to the Tagore household, coming to meet his father. There was Akhay Kumar Dotto, Rajnarayan Bose, and so many other learned men that he was constantly learning much more that a young child could learn at school or college for that matter. When he was 7 or 8 years old, one day, his nephew, Jyoti Prakash, you must remember that Tagore was the 14th child and his elder brother, Vijendranath, was almost 21 years older than him. So his nephews were also older to him sometimes. So Jyoti Prakash calls him and says, "You have to write poems." Tagore said, "What?" He'd seen poems only in the printed form before that. So when very easily he could do so, his joy knew no bounds. When Tagore was 12 years old, right after his initiation ceremony, and he was feeling quite embarrassed about going to school, he had no hair on his head. One day his father calls him and asks, "Would you like to go to the Himalayas with me?" Tagore was speechless with joy. Himalayas, and that too with father. First, they visited Bolpur, which was to become Santiniketan later, so famous later on. It was his first experience on getting up on a train. Bolpur, especially the Khwai, the undulations of the Khwai, the small rivulets of water, so many pebbles of so many different sizes, he was filled with joy. He would collect all sorts of pebbles and come and show them to his father, and his father would encourage him always. Then they moved to Amritsar, and finally to Dalhousie. Amidst the Himalayas, the beauty and majesty of the Himalayas totally mesmerized the young child. He would move from hill to hill amidst the tall giant trees. Alone, he was given total freedom by his father. It was not as if he was not studying. Devendranath saw to that. He was taught Sanskrit, Bengali and English literature. He had to bathe in the cold water early in the morning. Devendranath sang hymns for his young child, read out from the Upanishads to him. There was a lot of work, definitely, but he was also given freedom by his father. Devendranath believed that one has to learn from one's mistakes, and so he gave total freedom to his young child. Another person who gave the same freedom to Tagore, who treated him as a friend and not as a young child, was Jyoti Dada. So I believe Devendranath and Jyoti Dada somehow helped to create a mind of his own, a sense of independence that helped Tagore in his future life. Once he returned from the Himalayas, there was a major change in the household. He was no longer under the dominance of servants. He could go anywhere he wanted to, within the house, of course. And his mother called him again and again. She wanted to hear all about his experiences, and he was so happy. 1874 saw the publication of his poem Abhilasha in the Tattvabodhini Patrika. But his happiness was short-lived. In 1875, at the young age of 14, he lost his mother. Tagore almost stopped going to school after that, totally immersing himself to writing poems and songs. They offered him some solace from his grief. Also, the Tagore household, in addition to being culturally so progressive, there was a strong feeling of nationalism within the household. Jyotirindranath first initiated a Swadeshi Sabha and later A Hindu Mela was arranged where traditional Indian folk dance, martial arts, etc. were showcased, and young Tagore recited a poem standing underneath a tree before a whole crowd of unknown people, his first such in his lifetime. In 1878, when he was 17, his elder brother Shotendranath declared that he would take Robi to England. Tagore was speechless with joy. First Italy, then France. Tagore was struck with the affluence of Paris and finally England. First, he was a bit disappointed. He had imagined England to be a small island where he would be able to hear poets and learned men constantly reciting poems or being engrossed with literary work wherever he went. The reality of women more concerned about their fashion or beauty and people normally going about their work, having disappointed him at first. But slowly, he came to like this country too. He was very appreciative of the people, a sense of independence among them, not being intimidated by the elders always. He enrolled himself into a school and for the first time in his life, liked going to school too, and he came to respect the teachers there too. He felt that education there was connected to life itself. He came back realizing that man's love for each other was the same everywhere in the earth, and this feeling of universal brotherhood was embedded in him, and it was to remain with him through years in future. Returning from London, he once again immersed himself in writing poems and songs. By the seaside, on the Ganges, in the mountains, everywhere. 1880 saw the publication of his first book, Shandha Shangit, and in 1881 he wrote his first musical drama, Balmiki Pratibha, where he depicts how the dacoit leader became Balmiki, worshipping the goddess of education, Saraswati. In 1883, he was married to Mrinalini Devi, and in the period from 1886 to 1896, his 5 children, 3 daughters, Madhuri Lata, Renuka and Meera, and 2 sons, Rothindranath and Shomindranath, were born. But in the meantime, there were other important things happening in Tagore's life. In 1890, he was asked by his father to manage the Tagore estate at Shilaidaho, now in Bangladesh. And in a very short time, Tagore became adept in his work life too, having readily understood the miseries and worries of his subjects there, giving his total concentration to try and alleviate the miseries of his people there, as he moved on the Podda River on his boat from village to village through the beautiful countryside, creating some of his most memorable collections of poems. Most of the poems of Chitra, Choitali, Konika, Shonartori, the poems of Noibeddo and Khea, and also the songs of Gitanjali and Gitimallo were written there. In 1892, he criticized the prevalence of English education in India in his Shikhar Herfer, or Vagaries of Education. All the time, he was constantly thinking of the people of India, having started a Swadeshi store in Calcutta for the promotion of indigenous goods among the youth of Bengal, and also starting a jute processing factory at Kushtia, now in Bangladesh. In 1899, Tagore moved with his whole family to Santiniketan, and in 1901, with the approval of his father, he started a Brahmacharya with 5 students and 5 teachers, one of the students being his eldest son, Rothindranath. Tagore wanted to create a space where children would get an all-round development and learn with the heart, in closeness to nature, as opposed to the strict, repetitive and rote learning that he had had to do in his own childhood. Tagore based it on the principles of humanism, internationalism and sustainable development. But right after this, there was a period of total devastation in his life. In 1902, Mrinalini Devi passed away, and in 1903, Tagore lost his second daughter Renuka. In 1905, Debendranath passed away at 88, and in 1907, Tagore also lost his youngest son, Shomindranath. But Tagore was an extraordinary man. He did not allow these deaths to deter him at all, to break him. As he said while returning in a train after Renuka's death and seeing the beautiful moonlit countryside outside, he said, amidst all this beauty and magnificence, amidst life which continues undeterred in its own pace, why should I let my own grief to break me? Time and again, in his writings, in his poems, essays, he has referred to the Almighty all around us and entreated everyone to respect this oneness as he did throughout his life. By 1903-1904, Tagore had started to take serious interest in the political problems of the country. In 1904, he had already written Swadeshi Samaj, and in 1905, after Curzon's partition of Bengal, Tagore was so deeply stressed that he asked all Bengalis to fast on that day. All work stopped. Tagore took a holy dip in the Ganges and then led a huge procession, walking barefoot through the streets of Calcutta, everyone singing Banglar Mati Banglar Jol, a song which he had written especially for that day, and tying Rakhi around everyone's hands. Tagore remained politically active for the next couple of years, but in 1907, he was disillusioned by the politicization of the Hindu-Muslim conflict and left active politics after that. He did so even when Gandhiji asked him to join politics actively in 1925, though he remained politically active throughout his life through his writing. Tagore continued creating history through his poems, his songs, his essays, letters, his child literature. It is amazing how this little child within him could create such masterpieces as Koriyo Komol, Shishu, Bir Purush, Kabuliwala. Now such a versatile man's genius couldn't be kept within the boundaries of one country, could it? And so, as he sailed towards England, translating some of the poems of his Bengali Gitanjali, which had already been published in 1910, into English, and as he reached England and met the British painter William Rothenstein, the latter was so impressed by the quality of the poems that he arranged for the English Gitanjali to be published by the Indian Society of London, adding with it an introduction by W.B. Yeats. The inevitable happened. Tagore received the Nobel Prize for Literature as the first Asian to do so in 1913. His fame spread throughout the earth, from the far west to the far east. Right from 1916, when he visited America, China, and Japan, through the 1920s, Tagore was time and again invited by countries like Germany, France, Sweden, Holland, Switzerland, in the west to Myanmar, Java, Bali, Singapore in the east, and everywhere people turned out in huge numbers to packed audiences, to huge crowds on the streets. Everyone, from the common man to famous men like Einstein, Bernard Shaw, Romarola, everyone wanted to hear him, to listen to him and to interact with this great man. But all this while, other things were happening too. In 1915, Tagore received the knighthood from the British, but later on renounced it in 1919 as a protest against the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where more than 2,000 innocent unarmed men were killed and injured at the order of the British Brigadier General Dyer. In 1915, Tagore also met Gandhiji for the first time here in Santiniketan. In 1918, the foundation stone for his Vishwabharati with its motto of Yatra Vishwabhavate Kaniram was laid here, and Tagore even went abroad to raise funds through lectures in different countries. In 1920, the Santiniketan Village Welfare Institute was started at Santiniketan, 3 kilometers away from Santiniketan, for rural reconstruction. In 1924, another school, Shikha Shatru, was started at Santiniketan to cater to the needs of the village children around Santiniketan. In 1927, Tagore staged Noti Puja in Calcutta and even appeared on stage as a Buddhist monk in order to stop criticism, if any, for the girl students of Santiniketan who were dancing and acting in it. In 1928, at the age of 67, Tagore took to painting too, and in his lifetime created more than 2,000 paintings and sketches, though it all started with doodles as he struck out words and lines while writing, and they took the forms of different animals and birds. And exhibitions were held in France, in Germany, in England, even in America. In the 1930s, Tagore started writing his dance dramas, his trilogy of Chandalika, Chitrangada and Shama, where the whole dance drama was depicted through the Rabindric form of songs and dances. So, Tagore was constantly creating, constantly writing, and constantly receiving awards and accolades, even as late as in 1940, when the Oxford Institute conferred the doctorate on him through a special convocation held here in Santiniketan, as he was too old and not in a condition to go to England. In 1941, Tagore wrote his last essay called Crisis in Civilization, as the Second World War raged all around the earth. Tagore was filled with deep anguish to see the inhumanity, the hatred all around him. He couldn't even read it out himself. It was done by Kirtimohan Sen on his birthday in May in 1941. On 25th of July, he was seriously ill, taken to Calcutta, and breathed his last on the 7th of August 1941 at the age of 80. But Tagore lives even today in the hearts of millions all around the earth. Two things amaze me. One, the volume of creativity in one lifetime. And secondly, whatever he said about anything is so relevant even today. He was and is even today a truly modern man.